I'd like to welcome in the 19 White House correspondent, Jon Decker. Jon, how are you today? How are conditions in Iowa, we should ask?
Well, they're brutally cold. Wind chill expected tonight during the process of caucus voting, -30 throughout the state of Iowa. So that could indeed affect turnout at all these caucus sites throughout the state.
And Jon, I want to give people sort of an idea if they don't know what the difference between a primary and a caucus is. I was raised in Iowa. I've participated in caucuses. My first journalism career was in Iowa, so I've covered it as a journalist. This is very different from a primary. These are not polls that are open from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. You go and vote in your booth at any time of the day. A caucus is you show up to a site, whether it's a school, sometimes it's as small as a barber shop, and you walk in and you have to be a registered voter. Now, if there is an uncontested race, if we're looking for both nominees, a Republican and a Democrat, you have to prove your party registration. And then they direct you into a room, usually gymnasium. A representative of each candidate gets up, gives a couple minutes speech, and then you write down your vote on a paper ballot, which is counted out loud there in the room. And that's how they determine who's going to be the Republican nominee, at least from the state of Ohio, the state of Iowa, who's going to get their delegates. Jon, I want to ask you, why is Iowa so important? Because this is the first. What does this set off?
Well, it sets the stage for the contests that follow. It gives momentum for those who come in typically 1, 2, and 3. It narrows the field as well for those candidates who remain mired in the single digits and really don't get momentum coming out of this contest. So it is important, but it's not the end all and be all. Let me give you an example, Dan. Last 3 election cycles, the winner of Iowa did not go on to be the Republican nominee. Mike Huckabee won Iowa. Rick Santorum won Iowa. Ted Cruz won Iowa. They did not go on to win the Republican nomination. Donald Trump is trying to break that mold. He is leading, according to most polls, by double digits, and he hopes to live up to those expectations this evening.
And let's talk about the polls. Obviously, Donald Trump, the clear favorite. In recent years, we've learned maybe we can't trust the polls. Is there any talk of that, or is this a clear win for Donald Trump tonight?
Well, you asked me about the weather, and that could affect turnout, and we'll see whether some voters who were intending to caucus for Donald Trump stay home, seeing that polls indicate he's leading by double digits. The most recent poll released before the Iowa caucus is one jointly conducted by NBC News and the Des Moines Register that shows that those polled prefer Donald Trump. 48% of voters. That's followed by Nikki Haley at 20%, Ron DeSantis at 16%. We'll see if that holds true. One way I look at this as well, and this is not the way that most look at this, but it strikes me as odd that Donald Trump, who essentially is the incumbent, he's been president. He's served as president for 4 years, and 52% of Republican voters do not want him as their choice to be the Republican nominee, according to this most recent poll. That, to me, is telling, but we'll see if indeed he can get above that 50% threshold as the vote goes on tonight.
You know, and this is an interesting election cycle. We don't often have, we'd have to look way back in the record books to have someone who was a sitting president, does not win re-election, sits out those 4 years, and then comes back to run again. Of course, the first George Bush, he was a single-term president, but did not run again 4 years later. So it sets up a really interesting situation, but everything surrounding Donald Trump is really interesting. What happens after tonight? You are at the Iowa Caucus Center there in Des Moines. The results will come in much like a normal election, but what happens after? Do the candidates fly out tonight? Are they back on the road? What happens next?
After the vote takes place here, then attention is focused on what happens 8 days later. That's the New Hampshire primary, Dan. Some candidates will indeed leave from Des Moines, head to New Hampshire immediately to begin campaigning. Nikki Haley, certainly one of those individuals. Ron DeSantis, interestingly enough, will head from Iowa down to South Carolina. He thinks that the vote is made well for him in terms of the large percentage of evangelical voters that are Republicans in the state of South Carolina. Donald Trump is certainly hoping that he takes the momentum from perhaps winning Iowa to winning New Hampshire as well, and perhaps end this contest for the Republican nomination relatively early if he can win these first 2 states that vote in the process.
Jon Decker, our 19 White House correspondent, the eyes of the world, the political world, albeit, are there with you at the Iowa Caucus Center in Des Moines. Jon, thank you very much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Really appreciate it.